The new Aston Martin Vanquish is without doubt one of the most stunning cars that money can buy, and you join me here in Sardinia, Italy, surrounded by some amazing roads for a first drive in the British Super Grand Tourer to find out all about it. Now, having owned a previous generation Vanquish at the time, since pulling back the covers on the new model, I've been having some second thoughts about my recent decision to purchase its fiercest rival, the Ferrari 12Cilindri, and later we'll have my thoughts on how they stack up. The new Vanquish boasts an 835 horsepower V12. There's a fully updated interior, including new glass roof, and it wears lots of design details like the shield at the rear for us to discuss. Today, it's time for the first drive. Hi guys, I'm Shmee, hello, and welcome back to the channel. Let's find out if I've made the right, or perhaps the wrong, choice. I promise you where we're going, it's going to be sunnier than it is here, every finger crossed, but we want to get straight to the point here. What's interesting is that the new Vanquish has launched at almost exactly the same time, almost exactly the same price point as another car in a very similar segment of the market. So a 1-minute intro to this car, then let's go and drive, and then don't go anywhere because I think my feedback today could be quite interesting as to how this does actually stack up. Perhaps the pros of this, the pros of the alternative. The new Vanquish is stunning. It is a beautiful car. The design of this and what they've done, heavily inspired to my eyes by one of my favorite cars of all time, the Aston Martin 177. This very long front end, enormous grille, significantly larger than previously found, of course, for more cooling to this engine, which boasts some immense power figures. Most of the additional length of the car, it's much larger than the predecessor, the DBS of the previous generation, comes in this section between the A-pillars and the front axle, extended by 80 millimeters. But what that gives you is this powerful design, this line, this shape. In fact, here as well, you almost have this spear that comes down through the car towards the arches at the back. It delivers 835 horsepower and 1,000 newton meters of torque to the rear axle. This thing boasts some impressive numbers and a 12-cylinder power plant up front. Long live an engine like this. It's the return of the Vanquish badge. It's a big deal. It's a car that, like I said, I previously owned one of as well. In fact, I brought my previous Vanquish along with my Vantage GT8, which I still own to this day, out here to Sardinia. We drove them on a rally that I put together back at the time, had both of the Astons on this island, an incredible place to go and drive. But I think probably enough talk. Let's get straight in here, go and have some first thoughts and share a little bit more with you later on. Let's go. Check out the spec on this car. It is bright, it is bold, it is very, very blue, but I tell you what, I love this. We've got the blue headliner in here as opposed to the optional panoramic glass roof, but let me step in because we need to get this V12 fired up. You've got the selector here in the centre, and we'll go through more of the infotainment later on. One press for the power, another press for the ignition, or of course, foot on the brake, then press the magic button and get that V12 started. What a sound. Of course, this is where you can turn it into sport, up into Sport Plus mode, lots to go and test out, but to do so, the roads are beckoning. Let's get on the move. This is the road that chases the gap in the clouds in the Vanquish. And I tell you what, when I think of the first generation Vanquish from the Newport Pagnell era of Aston Martin, that was one of the coolest cars of its time, the Bond car. Then came a DBS, which I've actually owned later on one of as well, before of course the next Vanquish. Since that generation there's been another DBS sandwiched, but this is the all-new car, and there is so much to talk about as we are driving down some amazing roads. This is one of my favourite places to come and drive, and you're going to see all about that very shortly. Now, listen to this. Lots to discuss. We are currently in GT mode. We're going to go through Sport, Sport Plus, the other way, individual and wet mode as well. Again, lots of different settings. But the first thing I want to mention about this, as we actually get some sun coming through the clouds, it's been raining all morning, is that this is a big car. It's 13 centimeters longer than the DBS. It's also slightly wider tracked, it's also wider bodied, but due to the new frameless mirrors, it's actually slightly narrower, mirror to mirror. The amazing thing about it though, despite the longer wheelbase, is that it doesn't feel all that big on the road. It doesn't even feel all that heavy on the road. This is a significant step towards being even more dynamic, even more responsive, to use the word that they were mentioning in the briefing earlier on, and it's exactly what it feels like. Now, to rotate the toggle into sport mode, pop it into manual, and to start dropping down some of the gears, listen to this soundtrack. Second gear, 12 cylinders. Absolutely incredible, that powerful, deep rumble. Very typical of an Aston Martin sound, and what's quite impressive is how well they've disguised the sound of the turbochargers, and even the OPF. The noise of it is absolutely beautiful, and what's perhaps crazier is how powerful this thing is. In the different driving modes, you get different torque delivery. But take my word for it, when you put your foot on the throttle, 1,000 Newton meters feels pretty extreme. The amount of power it delivers and the way that it drives, how direct the steering is, how pointy it is, how well, like I said, it hides the amount of weight that you're carrying through some of these quite tight corners as we meander through one of my favourite places to drive. It's also, relative to the DBS, slightly less all over the place. And the DBS, on some slightly damp tarmac, you are lighting up traction control everywhere you go. In here, I feel like there's almost two characters to it. If you want it to be this shouty, pretty crazy, leery machine, it's got that available for you. If you want it to be a more gentle cruiser, we've also been driving on a regular highway, and it does that as well, but it gets a move on so well. Oh, this is such a good place to be driving it. What a car, and to relive these roads in a Vanquish again. We're basically in exactly the same area as where I'd come before. You get to silly territory very quickly. That's all I'm going to say with this at the moment. But let's crack on and continue chasing down the nicer weather today to enjoy the drive even more. Given it is the source of a whole lot of enjoyment, let's talk about the engine. In this day and age, there aren't all that many manufacturers bringing us cars that have 12-cylinder power plants. Of course, the Aston and the Ferrari equivalent, very much flying that flag, along with Lamborghini in the Revuelto. But let me pop open the bonnet here. We've got full carbon fibre bodywork, so the bonnet, the hood, is made from carbon fibre, and underneath is where we've got this new V12, the 5.2 litre twin turbocharged power plant. Now, unlike the DB12 and the Vantage that have the twin turbo V8, for this they needed to go significantly higher. To do so, they basically redid everything. We have 835 metric horsepower, that's 824 brake horsepower, and 1,000 Newton meters of torque. Now, all of that goes to the rear wheels through the 8-speed ZF gearbox with an electronic rear differential for the first time in this class of car from Aston Martin. It packs a serious punch. It sounds amazing. 0 to 100 kilometers an hour, 62 miles an hour, thanks to this, is just 3.3 seconds. And the top speed is 214 miles per hour, 345 kilometers an hour. That makes this the fastest series production Aston Martin ever. A significant step up. Now, not only the engine, but obviously a lot of other things have been reworked as well. So, for example, the stiffness, the new aluminium chassis that's used for this, is over 70% stiffer than the DBS 770 Ultimate, the predecessor. Of course, it's grown, as I said. The track at the front is 11 millimeters wider. The track at the rear is 20 millimeters wider. The body of the car about 10 millimeters wider over the top of that as well, but not in counting these mirrors with their frameless design. The car itself is so low, wide and sleek in its proportions. Come to the back, because this is where you've got this shield design, as they call it, this piece that goes into the rear that you can choose to have body coloured, gloss black or carbon fibre. That sits beneath the camtail, this ducktail, because while it's not a car that's purely about downforce, obviously downforce is still relevant. So at 155 miles an hour, 250 kilometers an hour, this, along with the diffuser and the aero at the front, help to give you about 65 kilos of downforce. At Vmax, so at the top speed of the car, it goes up to about 120 kilos. So enough to keep the car very planted. I would imagine for Autobahn driving, this would be really quite the experience, something that would feel really, really, really planted. We've got the carbon roof as opposed to the glass roof, but you know what? The roads around here are so amazing. Let's hop back in and let's keep driving. At the moment, I've got the car in Sport Plus, and of course that means a lot of adjustments are made: gearbox, throttle response, suspension. The Bilstein DTX dampers have a big breadth of ability, but when you're in Sport Plus, obviously they're in their stiffest setting, and they do get pretty stiff, but naturally you can independently adjust those, pop them either into the base setting or into Sport, as you would like. I do always appreciate being able to just drive a car like this in manual, even though the automatic does a very nice job of exactly what you would actually want from it. But a few other things to talk about. So for this car, unlike the Vantage and DB12, where they are shod with Michelin tyres, this wears a bespoke Pirelli P0, which is something that's, I suppose, historically been with the V12 Astons, and they've carried that through. It's a tyre that has some of the noise cancelling properties. That's obviously part of it in a way with a Super GT, a car of this nature. There are a lot of other things going on. Ceramic brakes, for example, 410mm front carbon ceramic rotors, big old discs, you need them for the stopping power, and that's something I can tell you from my own experience of the old Vanquish, that on roads like this, if you were driving pretty aggressively, at the end, your brakes might be smoking, and you kind of need to give them a cool down lap. Look at these views! Actually, as we come round here, what a road to be driving. You do of course have individual mode if you'd like to configure the car exactly to your wishes. You also have the wet mode, and interestingly, normally in a wet mode a car is basically just restricting your ability to deliver too much throttle, because that tends to be where it goes wrong in the wet. In the case of this, it's optimized to make it the fastest possible. So wet mode in those conditions is about driving as quickly as possible, with traction control and everything else, all of the other software working in sync obviously to bring that together. What's the price then to have this much fun? It's a punchy one. In fact, this car and the 12Cilindri are about the same. That's quite interesting, obviously depending on specification and the exact specifics of each individual car. But given they are basically the same amount of power, basically the same price point, very similar in many ways. The Ferrari has kind of softened from one generation to the next, whereas the Aston has gone the other way and become even more dynamic than it was before, but they've effectively gradually moved together in terms of their offering, and it makes it a very, very direct head-to-head, I'm going to say, comparison between them. So in terms of production numbers, Aston have spoken about how this car is going to be built to a maximum of 1,000 units a year, which is about a half to two-thirds of the DBS's production at its peak output. So probably overall a similar kind of number, but it's nice to know that they're not going to be absolutely everywhere, as the numbers of these kinds of cars do generally increase in time. More and more people purchasing, moving into collections, growing, that kind of thing. Comparing them though is a very tricky thing to do. The Ferrari has, as they always have done, this very, very shouty, fast revving V12, the naturally aspirated engine. And in terms of sound, don't get me wrong, this is very close to the sound of the old Vanquish that I had. But the Ferraris just rev so fast and have the DCT as opposed to the ZF 8-speed automatic. So the shifts just feel that touch more lively. Where this excels is the torque and the power delivery, which, as I mentioned earlier, you just feel. Torque is what you feel in terms of acceleration as opposed to horsepower. This is 5 horsepower more. Are you going to feel that difference? Not really, let's be honest about it. This is the flagship from Aston Martin. This is the absolute top. Perhaps there will be an Ultimate or an equivalent of the DBS 770 Ultimate in the future, but for the time being, this sits at the top of that tree. The 12Cilindri, no doubt, will spawn some other variant down the line, like the predecessor, the 812 Superfast, did with the 812 Competizione. As we drive through here, though, what I really enjoy about this is the mixture of the comfort and the performance of it. It's a strict 2-seater. You're not going to be getting anybody else behind you like you could in the previous cars, which were 2+2s. So you've got that extra luggage space, not only a decent amount in the boot at the back, but also plentiful right behind you. So for touring, this is such an awesome car. I mean, the view I have in the mirrors of those wide arches, the look of the thing is so reminiscent of the 177. It's something I could easily picture taking for many, many miles of long road trips. It would just be perfectly suited to the purpose. Another thing it does that I think is quite interesting is that mid-range acceleration, so shifting at 4,000 or 5,000 RPM, has a character to it. That's something that, with cars reaching these 800, 900, 1,000 horsepower figures, that you lose very quickly. Because the reality is, if you're at the red line in even second, but certainly third or fourth, you are way beyond legal speed limits. So the counter to that is to engineer in some fun, and the acoustic properties of this, and the way that straight after you've shifted up, it immediately brings the sound back to you. I need to get to a straight to properly demonstrate that. Gives you a lot of character, a lot of feel from it. you get straight away that little upshift noise, that pop going on, and then on you go, ready to pounce, ready to take on the next bit. One thing that's very personal that I'm going to say, steering wheel, I'm a fan of smaller, more dainty steering wheels. This has huge side grips, which you really have to kind of get your hands wrapped around to be able to hold properly. And again, buttons, controls, all massively move forwards. As we spoke about with new Vantage from the previous generation, this is a huge improvement versus older Vantage and the older DB11 and DBS platforms, obviously. Massive step in the right direction. Digital screens, we'll have a look at that when we parked up at the other end. I just need to find my way past the car in front of me to open this a little bit more and keep on enjoying the drive. But the thing is, when you have this much power, you don't need a very long straight to do it. Just the shortest little burst and boom, off you go. The torque coming in, perhaps in, let's say, third gear. If you're very low RPMs, you do find yourself just waiting that moment for it. It's a bit like an NA Porsche flat 6 engine in the sense that you always need to be one gear potentially lower than you think. Obviously, if you're in automatic, that's not an issue. The car's working that out for you. This is only a topic of discussion if you're driving manually, which I tend to like to do because I just like to be more involved in the car. Driving, pedals, brakes, left foot braking feels very natural, smooth and easy in here. Some cars it's a little bit harder than others, but driving this, it's nice. So how do I conclude this? It's difficult. I need more time to really process everything. So we'll come back to that one between these two big heavy hitters and how they stack up in a moment. When you get to a road as tight and twisty as this is, that's where you think a car of this size just shouldn't be able to make progress in the way that it does. And I have to say, that's probably one of the most impressive things, is that it's much more dynamic than ever before of this kind of car. You know, previous gen Vanquish and even the DBS, which I've obviously driven before as well, just aren't anything quite like this. They give you a sense of excitement and the thrill almost of being slightly on the edge of your seat. And obviously you can get that as well with this, believe me, just because of the amount of power and the way that it delivers it. But it also corners remarkably well, confidently, with great grip. That's one of the things probably that's the most impressive. Obviously with these tyres, even this bit of road is actually still a little bit damp here as we're driving through. But that power just goes down and it takes off. It's a really fun car to drive. I mean, Aston Martin have been overhauling the whole range. New Vantage is exactly like this as well. Such a big step on from where these cars were in their previous iterations. It's amazing to see. And obviously this sits completely on its own at the top of the pile. The Vantage and DB12 have different characteristics, but they do overlap quite a bit in terms of their price point. By the time you've spec'd the cars up, if you've added a fair few carbon options to a Vantage, you're right in there in DB12 territory. Obviously this is a big notch ahead. Its entry barrier price is nearly double the two before, but with that, it's a significant step up in terms of car. I mean, this, not all that long ago, think about this, it's more powerful than a 177. It looks probably even better than the 177, just because of the extra features and the modernisation of certain details as well. And you can get it for about a third where the 177 entered the market back in its day. It's a lot of car for the money, but for the money now, because if history tells us anything, and this goes for both the Aston Martin and the Ferrari, V12 Grand Tourers don't like to hold their value. They like to take a nosedive off a cliff, and I wouldn't be surprised if both this and 12Cilindri do exactly the same. The question is, this might do it more so, which is definitely something that is always going to be in the back of the mind when it comes to any purchase of something like this, to be completely honest. I have pulled over for a moment to show you a little bit more around the interior of new Vanquish, and we are right beside the sea here in Sardinia. Unfortunately, the sun has not burnt all of the clouds away, but nonetheless, there are lots of things to show you in here. Now, on the predecessors, it was chaotic with all of the buttons. This is much more refined. Things like your temperature controls, fan speed, and the volume are all really nice. The rotary for the mode selection as well, another lovely detail. Your selector to go into drive or upwards into reverse, immediately brings up your 360 cameras, of course. Again, all of the creature comforts and the things that you want to have in a car like this nowadays. You've got still some plasticky buttons around, you know, your camera, your exhaust suspension, your auto stop start, then some of your climate controls underneath the touchscreen, but it's a much tidier configuration than before. You've got a couple of cup holders, there's a wireless charging pad just in there, you have wireless Apple CarPlay, but wired Android Auto. The key has a nice little pouch right here as well, familiar key from some of the predecessor models. You can pop that just in there when, of course, you are out driving. The seats in here have this perforation, obviously for the cooling, the embroidery and details that you see all around, and it's very blue in here. Strict two-seater back there, just some storage areas. You can get some fitted luggage. The Bowers & Wilkins system is 1,170 watts. Sounds amazing. You've got a carbon support brace that runs over the top, and even on that rear deck, it's quilted back there as well. We've got the carbon fiber trims continuing. This brake that separates the upper dash from the lower dash, so some ideas for different color combinations and configurations as well, but the carbon that runs all the way around, wrapping across here as well. When it comes to the steering wheel, your pedals are mounted to the back, the extended shift pedals. You've got some controls obviously on here for your cruise control and that kind of thing, but again, just the simple stuff that you would expect. So screen wise, we've got two 10.25 inch displays, one up here which you can configure and change. Obviously you can cycle this to go through things on the right hand side, you can go to change the view and then make it into a different type of display. It just takes a moment to go through these. So for example, there we can click it to the dual roundel where you have a separate speedometer and rev counter. Choose that, set it up how you like. One very personal thing here, the sides of the central tunnel. This panel here is exactly where my knee sits, so when I'm going around a corner and it presses in, it's right on that edge. Of course, normally, depending on its seating position, it would be on the softer pads, but it's just something kind of unusual just on a personal level. You've got your mirror controls down here with your window switches, and then your seat controls, as has been tradition in recent years from Aston Martin, are there on the central tunnel, including the lumbar support and side bolsters and all of the other adjustments and things that you can shuffle and play around with. Pop open the doors, you've got the lever just there, again, the carbon trim, Bowers & Wilkins speaker grills everywhere here, up on the dashboard, in the center. These look really cool. They remind me of the old B&O speakers that the previous Vanquish had as well. Actually, I like that detail, that floating binnacle over the instrument cluster. Obviously with the very blue leather that we have inside this particular example, but all of these details, even having the embroidery up on the roof surface. I actually like this interior far more than I probably should. I think it's really smart. So in here, obviously, we've got CarPlay open at the moment with the navigation, but you've got your car systems, you've got telemetry, you've got a ton of different things that you can chop and change and play through. This obviously gives you a live readout when you're driving of what's happening. You can edit your individual mode if you want to set it up. I always like to have effectively everything quite sportily apart from the suspension. Normally like to soften that down. Obviously you've got then tiles and a ton of stuff that you can set up, as you'd imagine. This is a massive step forwards from what the car actually had in the previous generation. We're in GT, but if we go into Sport Plus for a moment, it sounds really good. There is a soft limiter, so you can't completely pack a punch. I say that, in Sport Plus it actually lets you play around. Very nice, very nice. Anyway, bit of an interior tour of Vanquish. So let's step out where we have this amazing view out here. What a lovely thing to be driving today. There are so many more things that we haven't touched on with this. The red V12 badging at the side, the intricacies of the 3D printing within the headlamp units. But we ran through a lot of that at Aston Martin Houston when the car was initially introduced, and I got to take a first look at it. Today, I'm trying to focus on the drive, right? On the drive, and particularly on this very interesting topic of Aston Martin Vanquish and Ferrari 12Cilindri, the 12-cylinder, because these are two cars that are both phenomenal. The segment that they sit in is one that they both absolutely excel. They are surplus to requirements of any realistic consumer of these things in terms of their performance, their technology, what they offer, the package that they include, the experience of owning and running one of them. And I'm lucky to have a number of Aston Martins and a number of Ferraris in my collection, so I've had these different opportunities, and I find this a very hard one to actually break down. For sure, they serve slightly different purposes. I would say this is a little bit more mature, perhaps. The looks of the Vanquish, no secret, Many people have discussed the controversy of Ferrari's design and that styling reminiscent of the old 365 GTB4, whereas everybody unanimously agrees that this is one of the best looking cars right now. For any money, anywhere in the world, this is absolutely amazing. The proportions, the styling, Aston Martin hit an absolute home run with the styling of this car. Now, I personally do quite like the design of 12Cilindri. I like that styling of the old Daytona, but I can imagine if you don't, obviously this is going to be the surefire winner. For me, I've always been a very big fan of the F12 and the 812 Superfast, and the 12C is kind of the facelift update to that. The engine that just screams and the way it revs, the feeling of the DCT, and the Ferrari V12 GT experience. I've been lucky to own a DBS and a Vanquish, so I've had a little bit of that experience of the 2-seat or the 2+2 from Aston Martin, and I haven't with Ferrari. So that's where I'm leaning at the moment, but this is the thing that's crazy. If I could, I'd buy one of these as well, because this is just awesome. What a cool car, what a beautiful car. Even just to sit and look at it, it's amazing. This has been a really cool day. For sure, the biggest, I'm going to say, downsides, like any new car realistically, is that they're getting heavier, the weights are increasing, the price tags are increasing as well. But those aside, you can't go wrong. It's a whole step ahead in the right direction for me. We need to get this dropped off though. We've got a flight to catch. So do let me know what you think. Which would you go for out of these two? I'm going to go away and mull it over a little bit more going forwards as well. But for now, that's all. If you like these kinds of cars, check out the video right over here. But that's it for this time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again very soon. Cheers.